This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Talia.
Hi, Tanya.
How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I am doing fantastic.
Fantastic.
I'm really excited to tell you about today's episode.
For real?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'm excited to hear it.
Because it's kind of weird.
Oh.
And weird's kind of fun.
Weird is fun.
So, before I start, though, I'd just like to remind everyone to subscribe or follow in whatever podcast app you're listening to us in.
We're not picky.
Nope. I wanted to mention before we got too far into the episode that my source for the information in today's episode was from an article that I found on Murderpedia. It was written by Michael Newton for TrueTV.com. I also used information found in an article on Inquisitor.com, and I'll have a link to both of those in the show notes. And let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm going to tell you this weird episode.
Okay.
Mark Kilroy was a pre-med major from the University of Texas on March 14th, 1989. On that day, Mark and some friends were on spring break in Matamoros, Mexico, which is just across the Rio Grande River from Brownsville, Texas. Matamoros was a popular spring break destination for college students since the 1930s. Because you could find a lot of drugs and alcohol. There were sex shows. It was just wild.
Sex shows.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what that means, but there was just a seedy side of Matamoros that spring breakers could find. In 1989, though, crime was rampant and there was lots of poverty in that city. But college students would flood the area with money every spring break. However, in 1989, the kids that came over from the U.S. for spring break, and they usually got about 250,000 spring breakers. They didn't know that Matamoros was hiding a terrible secret. Since New Year's Day, 1989 to March, 60 unsolved disappearances had occurred in Matamoros.
60?
60 in the span of 3 months. People were just disappearing. On the night that Mark disappeared, he had been partying with some of his friends. He had gone on spring break with 3 other guys. They originally were spending their spring break on South Padre Island, and they decided to cross the border into Matamoros because they could get cheap beer and there were lots of clubs. They initially ended up at a bar that was called El Sombrero, but then they changed and went to a bar that had recently been converted into a Hard Rock cafe. One of Mark's friends said that Mark was hanging around a girl that he had met that evening. She had won 3rd place in a tanning contest. And when he had finished talking to her, the 4 guys headed back over to the border. What they had done was they had left their car parked on the American side of the border, and they had to walk across the bridge to get back to their car. As they got closer to the American border, one of his friends ran ahead because he had to pee, so he was going to pee where there were some trees. And when he went to go do that, he saw there was a Mexican guy trying to get Mark's attention. He thought, well, maybe it was somebody that Mark knew, so he really didn't think too much about it. When he finished peeing, he went back to his friends and he noticed Mark wasn't there. The 2 other guys were looking for Mark and they couldn't find him, and they thought, well, maybe, he slipped away and he ran ahead of them without them seeing, and maybe he'll be waiting at the car for them when they got across the border. They get across the border, they get to the car, and Mark's not there. His friends initially didn't think anything was wrong and thought, well, maybe he got a ride back to the hotel with someone else. So they went back to the hotel and went to sleep. It was only until the next morning that they realized that Mark was missing. And they reported him missing to the local police.
What were they doing?
They were out partying.
Oh.
And I think in all of the rush of, meeting people at the bars and things like that, I think they just lost him. Police noticed that there was something different with Mark than there was with many of the others who had gone missing. Mark was American and had an uncle who worked for U.S. Customs, so it was kind of unusual to have an American go missing. There was immediately a $15,000 reward issued for information leading to Mark's safe return or the arrest of those involved in his disappearance. Police interviewed 127 known criminals in Matamoros, but it was of no use. None of them had seen or knew of Mark Kilroy. During this same time, Mexican authorities were conducting one of their periodic anti-drug campaigns where they would set up roadblocks and go through the border towns looking for drug smuggling, drug dealing, things like that.
The Mexican government?
Yes. These campaigns were designed more to find the drug runners or the local drug dealers as opposed to the huge drug kingpins. One such runner, known all around Matamoros, was Serafin Hernandez Garcia. Serafin was 20. He was the nephew of a local drug lord named Elio Hernandez Rivera. On April 1st, 1989, so a couple weeks after Mark disappeared, Serafin drove past a police checkpoint outside of Matamoros. He seemed unaware that the police were even there, so he kind of blew through this checkpoint, even though the police basically had armed guards protecting the highway. Basically, a police chase ensues, and the police went after him. He led them to a rundown ranch. So everybody gets to the ranch, and police start searching it, and they discover traces of marijuana and occult paraphernalia. They let Serafin go, though, because there's really nothing to hold him there. But about 8 days later, on April 9th, police went back to the ranch, and they arrested Serafin and another drug dealer, David Valdez. Despite their arrests, David and Serafin seemed really unbothered by their arrest. I think they were arrested for drug-related offenses. David and Serafin told the police that they were protected by something higher than the law. And that's why they were really unbothered by their arrest. They just were like, yeah, nothing's going to happen to us. While Serafin and David were in police custody, the police interviewed the ranch caretaker. The caretaker said that members of the Hernandez drug family often came to the ranch, which was called Rancho Santa Elena. And they often had visitors come see them. One such visitor happened to be Mark Kilroy. The caretaker identified him through a picture that the police showed to him.
Missing man?
The missing guy, yeah. The police took this information back to Serafin and said, Mark Kilroy's been identified as being at the ranch. Serafin freely admitted that he participated in abducting Mark, as well as participating in the murder of Mark. He said there were many murders that happened at the ranch and that they were human sacrifices. He explained to the police that they had to use human sacrifices because it was like a religion to them. It was this occult religion that they used as protection for their crime family. Serafin also identified the leader of the crime family, or godfather. In Spanish, it's El Padrino. He was Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo. Adolfo practiced a type of African magic called Palo Mayombe, and it was he who ordered these killings. Serafin said it was also Adolfo who was the one that primarily tortured, and he sodomized the human sacrifice victims prior to killing them. And then he would perform rituals with the organs he took from the victims. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Palo Mayombe. Their belief system really had two main tenets. One was they believed that they could connect with the spirit world. And they also believed that nature had power. For example, natural objects, specifically sticks, were thought to be infused with power, which then were kind of linked to powers that spirits have.
Okay.
It's kind of like Santeria, but it's not Santeria if you've ever heard of that. But you could either practice white magic or black magic too, from what I understand in Palo Mayombe. The police took Seraphin out to the ranch, and he showed police a graveyard where they would lay their victims to rest. The police then said, okay, you need to start digging in the graveyard, which he did, and they uncovered 12 bodies, all neatly buried in a row. All the victims were male. Some had been shot at close range. Others were hacked to death with a machete. One of the victims found was Mark Kilroy. His skull was split open and his brain was missing. Also missing was his spine. Now I'm going to tell you, unfortunately, what really happened to Mark. Adolfo had picked him out because he decided he needed a quote-unquote superior brain, i.e. one that belonged apparently to a white guy, in order to cast his spells. So Mark got abducted, and they took him to the ranch. Initially, his head was wrapped in very heavy tape. He was given some bread and water to eat so that he would stay alive. He was tortured and sodomized. He did try to escape at one point, but he was hit in the back of the neck with a machete to stop him. When Mark was dead, his body was dismembered, drained of blood, his heart was removed, and his brain, a horseshoe, a turtle, a goat's foot, and his spinal column were all put in a boiling cauldron, which was meant to signify the sacrifice. Police found a nearby shed, and they searched the shed. Inside of it was a cast iron kettle that was filled with blood, animal remains, and sticks. The sticks were used in rituals to communicate with the spirits in the afterlife, like I kind of mentioned how in their religion, nature has power. Also found floating in the cauldron was Mark's brain, along with scorpions, spiders, and other unidentifiable objects.
That's disgusting.
Isn't it, though? I just can't even imagine the horror that they saw. Once the bodies and the kettle were found, the police knew that they had their hands full. Not only was Adolfo crazy, obviously, because of what they're practicing, but he was also rich because he was the head of this drug family. The police also knew that he had many disciples who would protect him at all costs. Further, they had no idea where Adolfo was at this point. So before I go further into the story, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Adolfo. He was born in Miami in 1962, and he was the son of a 15-year-old Cuban immigrant. When he was 6 months old, his mother had a Haitian priest who practiced Palo Mayombe, bless little Adolfo. This priest told her that her son was going to be a chosen one and was destined for great power. Soon afterward, when Adolfo was less than a year of age, his mother moved them to San Juan, Puerto Rico. He was baptized Catholic in San Juan and even briefly served as an altar boy, but he and his mother kept their true religion, the Palo Mayombe, a secret. His mother continued to be deeply involved in Palo Mayombe and made sure that Adolfo's magical education continued. There were teachers in San Juan and in nearby Haiti that he went to visit and was learning the ways of Palo Mayombe from. In 1972, when Adolfo was 10, the family moved back to Miami for good, and Adolfo began an apprenticeship with a Haitian priest in Little Havana. During Adolfo's childhood, his mother was arrested at least 30 times for various crimes, such as trespassing, shoplifting, check fraud, things like that. But she never went to jail and was always just given probation. She credited Palo Mayombe as the reason she stayed out of jail, because she would have rituals performed as a protection for her.
Well, why didn't it protect her from getting caught?
Right, that's what I would think.
I'm just curious.
I know, why get caught in the first place, right? Her neighbors in Little Havana would often gossip about her and say she was a witch. That made her really angry, and the neighbors would sometimes find headless chickens and goats on their doorsteps.
She's a crazy bitch.
She's a crazy bitch, yeah.
You crazy bitch, but you fuck so good.
She and Adolfo would move quite a bit, and when they would move and the landlord would come into their apartment, like to clean things up and get ready for the next tenant, there was always just nasty shit left behind. Like, they would find areas stained with blood.
Chicken heads.
Exactly, yes. Animal remains. The apartment basically was vandalized, but they didn't clean up after themselves. They left stuff behind. So I mentioned his mom's criminal record. As Adolfo grew older, he really wasn't a model citizen either.
Well, clearly we've established that.
He graduated from high school like basically the bottom of his class, and he committed petty crimes like his mom. The only thing that Adolfo truly seemed interested in was practicing the dark magic of Palo Mayombe. He and his teacher would rob graves to find items for his mentor's cauldron, and they would spill blood over voodoo dolls of their enemies to curse them. It was common practice back then for drug dealers to come to Palo Mayombe priests to give their businesses protection. But Adolfo's teacher warned him about drug dealing families. He said, "Let the non-believers kill themselves with drugs. We will profit from their foolishness." By the time Adolfo was 14, his mother was convinced that he had psychic powers. The story goes that a few months prior to John Hinckley shooting President Ronald Reagan in 1981, Adolfo had stated that Reagan would survive his wounds, quote unquote.
Well, he's got 50% chance of being right.
But he didn't, this was before he even shot him.
Oh.
But as you mentioned, like with his mom, this protection that these spells would last, Adolfo's psychic power didn't keep him safe because he was arrested twice in 1981 for shoplifting, and during one of those shoplifting sessions, he stole a chainsaw. For what purposes, I can only imagine. In early 1983, Adolfo chose his patron saint. So I guess it's similar to like in Catholicism when you choose your saint. He pledged himself to Satan and devoted himself to the worship of evil for profit. During his final initiation ceremony, his mentor carved mystic symbols in Adolfo's flesh, and these marks were meant to leave scars. At the height of the ceremony, Adolfo stated, quote, "My soul is dead, I have no God," end quote.
I feel like that sometimes. 2020's
beat us all down, right? After Adolfo's initiation was completed, he was now able to teach Palo Mayombe to others. Adolfo ended up in Mexico City in 1983. From what I read, he was working on a modeling contract.
Was he hot?
He was nice looking, but like 1983 is nice looking because he had a mullet in the pictures that I saw. In Adolfo's spare time, he told fortunes with tarot cards in the city's infamous Zona Rosa, or Red Zone, which is where you could find sex workers every night. While in Mexico City, Adolfo recruited his first disciples, Martin Quintana Rodriguez and Jorge Montanez, who was gay and was also psychic, and Omar Ocha. Both Martin and Omar became Adolfo's lovers, and depending on how he felt, he would refer to each of them as his man or his woman. So I'm letting you know that Adolfo is gay.
I picked that up.
Yes. In 1984, Adolfo relocated and made Mexico City his permanent home because he was just there temporarily working. He lived with Martin and Omar, and his reputation as a Palo Mayombe priest spread throughout the city. Believers said he could see the future, and Adolfo also offered to do cleansing spells for those who believed that their enemies had cursed them. These services didn't come cheap, though. Adolfo documented in a journal that one customer paid him $4,500 for a single ceremony. He kept a journal of all of his jobs, quote unquote.
I need to get into that.
I know.
Business.
He also sold animals to sacrifice in his rituals. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of the price list. Roosters went for $6. Goats for $30. You could pay $450 for a boa constrictor, $1,100 for an adult zebra, and $3,100 for a lion cub. Following the advice of his mentor, Adolfo recruited drug dealers and offered them protection. Like, for example, they would schedule shipments of drugs and meetings based on Adolfo's predictions. He would also offer them magic, of course for a price, that would make the members and their bodyguards invisible to police and bulletproof to their enemies.
Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, people?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're paying for this service?
They're paying for this. One drug dealer in Mexico City paid him over $40,000 in a 3-year period for his magical services.
To make them fucking invisible to the police. Really?
Really?
Okay. Move on, Tanya. I can't handle this stupidity. It's too much.
You and I think this is bullshit, but one of the reasons these people were doing this and paying him for these services is that they truly believed it. They grew up believing in this magic. So it was all something that they were comfortable with. And it wasn't just something that was new and sprung on them. They had grown up believing in Palo Mayombe. Adolfo soon learned that he needed to put on a show to be able to charge these prices. And because they were paying him a lot of money and he didn't want to disappoint them, especially because they were people that carried machine guns around all the time.
Well, he's got protection, though.
Right? Why wouldn't he do a spell for himself?
I'm confused by this.
In 1985, he was well known throughout Mexico City, and this is when he first started his own bloody cauldron. He and 3 of his followers robbed a graveyard for bones, and the cauldron was stocked. He had a lot of people that were respected members of authority in Mexico City. One of his more politically connected believers was a guy who retired from the federal police, and he was the chief of the Mexican branch of Interpol. So it's kind of strange that you have these higher up people in government believing in this Palo Mayombe and giving Adolfo money. Adolfo was gathering followers and believers, and they all treated him like he was their connection to the spirit world, and they seemed to worship him. So just kind of setting the tone for you guys. In 1986, the retired police officer that I mentioned, who was the chief of the Mexican branch of Interpol, ended up introducing Adolfo to the Calzada family, which was one of Mexico's most dominant drug cartels. He became employed by the family, and he was paid handsomely for his spells and voodoo crap. In 1987, he was able to pay cash for a $60,000 condo and had a ton of luxury cars, including a Mercedes-Benz that cost $80,000. He wasn't working exclusively with the Calzada family, though, and he still ran his own scam. He once posed as a DEA agent, the Drug Enforcement Agency for the U.S., and ripped off a cocaine dealer in Guadalajara, and then turned around and sold the drugs through his contacts with the police for $100,000. After working with the Calzada family for a year, he credited himself and his magical prowess for the cartel remaining successful and off the police radar. Because he believed this, he went to the head of the family and demanded to be a full partner in their drug cartel. But this was met with a flat refusal. On the outside, Adolfo seemed to accept this, but on the inside, he was plotting his revenge against the Calzada family. On April 30th, 1987, Guillermo Calzada Sanchez and 6 members of his household disappeared under mysterious circumstances. They were reported missing on May 1st, the next day, and police noted melted candles and other items that showed that some type of ceremony had been performed in Guillermo's office. About a week later, police began finding mutilated human remains in the Zampango River, which just kind of washed up, and eventually 7 bodies were found. All of them showed signs of terrible torture. Ears, fingers, toes, hearts, and genitalia were removed.
Of the guy's family?
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it means his wife and kids, or did it mean his wife and kids and his bodyguards, but altogether there were 7 people. In 2 of the victims, their brain had been removed, and one of the bodies showed part of the spine had been removed. Of course, Adolfo had fed his cauldron with these offerings and believed that his strength and power was growing. A few months after the victims of the Calzada family were found, Adolfo was driving his new Mercedes through Mexico City on July 30th, 1987. As he was driving in traffic, he deliberately cut off a woman named Sara Maria Aldrete Villarreal. Sara was at the time dating Gilberto Sosa, who was a drug dealer for the Hernandez family, and Adolfo was watching him. Adolfo met Sara as they exchanged information because they had this traffic incident, and it seemed like they hit it off right away. There was an undeniable attraction to one another, but Adolfo didn't try to make any move on Sara, even though she was a striking woman who stood about 6'1".
Did you say he intentionally, drove into her, though?
Yeah, because I think he was trying to meet her.
Well, that's
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's a weird way. Just go to the goddamn bar.
I know, and Sara describes him as being like incredibly charming and everything during this meeting. They exchanged their information, and Adolfo noted that Sara and his mom had the same birthday.
I thought he liked guys.
I know, it's kind of bizarre.
Okay.
Sara was just 2 years younger than Adolfo, and she was born in Matamoros. She attended high school, though, in Brownsville, Texas, across the border. She was described as a good kid and a model student. She attended secretarial school when her teachers encouraged her to go to actual college because they really believed that she had the brains to do it. However, her path to college was interrupted by love. Sara married a man 11 years older than her on Halloween 1983. Their marriage didn't last long, and after 5 months, they eventually began proceedings to get divorced. In 1985, Sara applied for and received resident alien status in the U.S. and enrolled in Texas Southmost College, TSC, in Brownsville. She started classes and majored in physical education. She was really hardworking because she did get some financial aid, but she paid for the rest by holding down 2 jobs. After her divorce, she moved back to her parents' home in Matamoros. Her life seemed to be moving in the right direction for the time being. She had good grades, and she thought they would be good enough for her to be able to transfer to a larger university where she could graduate with a 4-year degree in physical ed because she really wanted to get her teaching certificate. But her fate changed when she started dating Gilberto and had that fateful meeting with Adolfo on July 30th, 1987. Adolfo and Sara began a friendship, and 2 weeks after they met, Adolfo met Sara and her boyfriend, Gilberto, but refused to shake his hand at the meeting. I'm not sure what all that was about. Gilberto then received an anonymous phone call saying Sara was cheating on him, and when he confronted her, she denied it. However, he broke up with her anyway, and so she turned to Adolfo for comfort and was surprised to find out that he had foreseen the breakup in his tarot cards after the fact. Sara and Adolfo did end up having sex, but the sexual part of their relationship didn't last.
Because he likes guys. And Sara came to accept that. And instead, she decided to take just a deep dive into Palo Mayombe. Her classmates at TSC noticed a difference in her because all she started talking about was witchcraft and magic. At this time, Adolfo began referring to Sara as La Madrina, or godmother, in his growing sect. So we have him as godfather and her as godmother. He convinced Sara that he could see the future, and he told her that the leader of the Hernandez family, whose name was Elio, would be coming to her for advice about a problem. When this actually occurred, I'm not sure what the problem was. Sara brought him to meet Adolfo. At this time, the Hernandez drug cartel family was having some internal troubles and started to have inter-family arguments. Things were starting to break down from the inside. This was noticeable to Adolfo, and he decided that he was going to try to capitalize on it. He convinced Elio that Palo Mayombe could help heal the family by taking out their enemies through ritual sacrifices, and those same sacrifices would also serve to protect the members of the family. Adolfo told Elio that if family members were loyal to him, they would become invisible to authorities and bulletproof to their enemies. So what did Adolfo ask for in return for these duties? Money.
He asked for 50% of the profits made by the family and for control of the family.
50% and control?
And he got it.
Oh.
Adolfo moved his headquarters to Rancho Santa Elena, which I spoke about at the beginning of this episode. And on May 28, 1988, he shot and killed a drug dealer and a farmer at the ranch because he wanted to use them in his rituals. But it wasn't enough. So he went to Mexico City and supervised the murder, torture, and dismemberment of a trans woman who was the lover of a former member of his growing sect. Her remains were dumped on a public street for all to see, and she was actually found by children who ran screaming from the scene. You may wonder why torture was such a focal point of Palo Mayombe. Adolfo told his followers that the victims must die screaming, which would please the demons that they served, because the demons knew a person died a painful and antagonizing death.
So he made sure that all of his victims suffered
greatly. On August 10th, 1988, a rival gang kidnapped a man and his 2-year-old son. In retaliation, Adolfo's members kidnapped a stranger 2 days later and tortured him to death at the ranch, all while chanting prayers for the safe release of the man and his son. When the man and his 2-year-old were released 2 days later without any ransom being exchanged,
Adolfo took credit and claimed to be the one that helped get them released. In November of 1988, the next victim of Adolfo's brand of Palo Mayombe was an ex-cop and cult member, Jorge Valente de Ferro Gomez. And I mentioned he was a cult member, but he had violated Adolfo's rule against using drugs, and therefore Adolfo designated him as their next human sacrifice. His death was followed by a rival drug smuggler who was tortured to death at the ranch on Valentine's Day, 1989. After that, 2 drug dealers were sacrificed after they happened upon the ranch by mistake. Like, I don't know how you happen upon a ranch by mistake, but they wandered into the middle of a ceremony, so they were sacrificed. Several days after that, an unidentified man was kidnapped and was destined to be a torture victim, but he put up a huge struggle. Adolfo told Elio to shoot him instead of taking the time to torture him in the shed or use him in the group's ritual. So he's kind of like a waste for them. On February 25th, 1989, followers accidentally kidnapped Elio's 14-year-old cousin and killed him before they caught their mistake. So unfortunately, Elio's cousin was a human sacrifice.
What the hell?
I know. And
accidentally?
I know.
I'm sorry, Elio.
Right?
My bad.
And I didn't read anything like Elio was pissed about it. I don't know. Anyway, Adolfo decided he needed to make just one more human sacrifice. And the reason why he's doing this is because he needs to ship 800 pounds of marijuana that he stole from another gang. He needed to ship it across the Rio Grande and get it into the United States to sell. On March 13th, 1989, Adolfo told his followers to find someone that would scream during his rituals. The next morning is when they brought Mark Kilroy to Adolfo. Kidnapping and murdering Mark Kilroy was where Adolfo really fucked up. He wasn't able to foresee the amount of news that it was going to generate when he disappeared. And as I mentioned earlier, Mark was different than the other victims. The other victims were native to the area, probably poor, and Mark wasn't necessarily in the drug family or a drug dealer or a smuggler or associated any way either with any cartel. Usually when those victims are reported in the media in Mexico, citizens feel like sometimes that's the price you pay for your dangerous dealings. Like if you're a drug dealer and you get tortured to death, that's kind of like...
You played the game.
Right, exactly.
Mark's an American, Tanya.
Yeah, that wasn't Mark. His parents were in an affluent community. His family had political connections. Most obvious, though, like you mentioned, he's American, and he's killed in an incident that could cause international consequences. The local police in Matamoros wanted to solve his murder case and solve it fast to avoid any further damage to their poor reputation as being easily to bribe and slow to solve cases. Due to the immense press generated by Mark's murder, Adolfo decided he needed one more sacrifice to ensure the smuggling of the 800 pounds of weed he still had to get across the Mexico-Texas border. His final victim was none other than Gilberto Sosa, Sara's former boyfriend and member of the Hernandez family. He was tortured and murdered on March 28, 1989. Surprisingly, Adolfo's weed made it safely across the border on April 8th, even though Serafin Hernandez had led authorities to the ranch a week prior during their investigation of Mark's disappearance. Once again, Adolfo was convinced his magic had protected the load, and he collected $300,000 in return for the weed. However, this protection soon dissipated when the next day, April 9th, 4 members of the Hernandez family were arrested with Adolfo's $300,000 in their possession. So it never made it to him.
There goes that whole protection theory out the door.
Right? On April 11th, the ranch was further explored by Mexican authorities, and 3 more bodies were found, in addition to the 12 that were found when Serafin led police to the ranch. Adolfo went underground to escape arrest, and he was joined by Sara, as well as his live-in lovers, Martin and Omar. A hitman from the family named Alvaro de Leon Valdez, he also went with them. His nickname was El Doobie.
I love that. I don't know why.
I know.
I just love that
El
for
Doobie.
some reason.
Adolfo and the group ended up staying in Mexico City after considering fleeing to Miami, where his mother was, but he decided that running home to mom might be obvious. The group ended up staying hidden by moving from one follower's home to another. So they were kind of shuffling around all the time to avoid capture. Before I go any further into our story, we're going to take a little break.
Okay.
This story soon gained traction in the media. Geraldo Rivera actually reported on the discoveries at Matamoros, and TV journalists from around the world covered the story. Adolfo was supposedly spotted in Chicago, and there were rumors that he was seen in the U.S. and that Sara was seen in schools throughout the Rio Grande Valley. There was all these stories, like one about Sara was that she had threatened to kidnap and murder 10 American children for each one of the followers that were jailed in Mexico. Despite all of this media coverage, Adolfo and the gang were still underground. On April 18th, 1989, Adolfo read his own tarot cards and he saw betrayal in them. He grew suspicious of his friends and he slept with an Uzi within his arm's distance. He barely slept and often threatened those around him, saying he was more powerful than the police. He would say, quote, "They cannot kill you, but I can," end quote. On April 22nd, 1989, Rancho Santa Elena became the victim of arson. Adolfo watched on TV as his ritual shed burned to the ground. He was incensed when he saw police conducting an exorcism over the grounds and sprinkling holy water on it, and they sprinkled holy water over the graves.
The
police. This just drove Adolfo nuts. On April 24th, just a couple days after that, one of Adolfo's followers, Jorge Montes, was arrested at his home when it was raided. His home was only 3 blocks from where the Calzada family was murdered in 1986. Jorge couldn't confess fast enough, and he told police everything he knew about Adolfo and his brand of Palo Mayombe. He told them Adolfo was the godfather, and he was the one who was the mastermind and executioner behind all of the ritual killings. 3 days later, Adolfo and his little gang went to their last hideout in Mexico City. Sara was afraid for her life, and she wrote a letter dated May 2nd, which she threw out the window to the street below. It said, quote, "Please call the judicial police and tell them that in this building are those that they are seeking. Tell them that a woman is being held hostage. I beg for this because what I want most is to talk, or they're going to kill the girl," end quote.
Is she trying to make herself seem like a victim now, too?
Mm-hmm. Someone walking on the street did find the letter, and after he read it, he just put it in his pocket because he thought it was some kind of joke. So the help that Sara was asking for never came. Adolfo began planning on taking his disciples and starting fresh somewhere, like he was going to just
start over.
He would assure the members that, quote, "They'll never take me," end quote. However, on May 6, 1989, Adolfo's hope at starting fresh was extinguished. Police came to the door where they were staying, coincidentally not looking for Adolfo, but a child that was missing in an unrelated case. When Adolfo saw the police at the door through a window, he panicked and he just started shooting with his Uzi. Within a few minutes, 180 police officers surrounded the apartment, and there was a fierce gun battle that lasted for 45 minutes. This is something that I picture like out of Scarface or something, right? Even though there was active gunfire in those 45 minutes, only one officer was wounded when he was struck by Adolfo's first shots. No fatalities were reported on either side. It was just a waste for those 45 minutes. Adolfo soon realized he wasn't going to be able to escape. He handed his gun to Al Duby and told him to kill him and Martin. Al Duby told Adolfo he couldn't do it, but Adolfo hit him in the face and told him if he didn't do it, then everything would go bad for him in hell. Like basically, you need to kill me, otherwise when you go to hell, it's just going to be bad. Which I thought was kind of ironic considering isn't hell a bad place?
Hell.
Right? Al Duby did do what he was ordered to do, and he killed Adolfo and Martin by shooting them. Police found their bodies slumped together in a closet, and I actually saw a picture. Like, Adolfo's wearing, like, shorts and a t-shirt, like he's on vacation or something. Police promptly swarmed in and arrested Al Duby, Sara, and Omar, and they were taken to jail. Al Duby gleefully told the police he killed Adolfo, but told them, quote, "The Godfather will not be dead for long," end quote. Supposedly, I guess, what is he going to raise from the dead?
With the story, I don't know.
I know, right? His confession just basically sealed his fate, and he was convicted on 2 murder counts and sentenced to 35 years in prison. 14 cult members ended up being indicted on a bevy of charges, including multiple murder, weapons charges, drug charges, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Omar was found guilty at trial but died of AIDS-related symptoms before he could be sentenced. Sara, at first, tried to claim she was a victim, but she ended up telling on herself when she told police of intimate details of the group's rituals. She was acquitted of Adolfo's murder but was sentenced to 6 years for criminal association. She maintained that she never practiced any religion except Christian Santeria and said that the unearthing of all the victims at the ranch was a complete surprise to her. However, the jury at her trial didn't buy it. She, along with 4 male accomplices, were convicted of multiple murders that occurred at the ranch. She was sentenced to 62 years, while her accomplices that included Elio and Serafin were given 67-year sentences. Should the day come where Sara Aldrete and other members of the Hernandez family are released from prison, American authorities are ready to go after them for the murder of Mark Kilroy. So right now, they're not able to prosecute them yet. The legacy left by Adolfo and his cult is that there are many crimes associated with the group that are left unsolved.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Palo Mayombe continues to be practiced outside of the Hernandez family and outside of Adolfo's reach. Sara told reporters from prison that there was a temple that had been found in Monterey that isn't related to Adolfo's cult, so she believes that the practice of Palo Mayombe will continue.
I'm sure she's probably right.
I'm sure she's probably right, too. Mexico City recorded 74 unsolved ritual murders, with 14 of them involving infant victims between 1987 and 1989.
You mean babies?
Babies. Adolfo's cult is suspected in at least 16 of the 74. All of them that they believe are attributed to Adolfo's cult involve children or teenagers, but there isn't enough evidence to pursue charges against anyone. Regarding the unsolved cases in Mexico City, the prosecutor at the time said that, quote, "We would like to say yes, Adolfo did them all, and poof, all those cases are solved. And the fact is, we believe he was responsible for some of them, though we'll never prove it now. But he didn't commit all of those murders, which means someone else did, someone who is still out there," end quote. And that is my awful story.
He died way too easy.
He did die way too easy. It's just not fair. I know. Those families of his victims really didn't get any justice.
That's so crazy. That's such a crazy story. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Bizarre, odd, sad. A lot of emotions going on right now.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yes, thank you. And if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe/follow button on your favorite app.
And if you'd like more information, please go to our website, tntcrimes.com. You can also find us on social media. You can find us by either searching for Crimes and Consequences or at TNT Crimes Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
And you can also, if you'd like to become a member and enjoy the perks of that, which include lots of extra episodes, we also go live quite a bit.
We sure do.
And do live episodes.
That's always fun.
Yeah, go to patreon.com/TNT Crimes, or you can go to our website and find out more information about how you can do that.
Check us out. And by doing so, becoming a member, you help support us so we can keep the ads to a minimum and continue doing what we love and giving you these episodes.
All of this great content.
So much great stuff.
So until next week.
Stay safe. Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.